Today I want to introduce the concept of power. When we think about power, we often think about electricity, or maybe a big engine or a windmill. We think about things that can cause movement. Often we separate our notions of political or cultural power from notions of electrical or hydraulic power. But we don't really need to do that. There's a point that's worth making early into our discussions. When we talk about bad things that happen, people who are hurt or taken advantage of, we tend to focus on rule breakers, bad apples who we think need to be picked out and replaced by better apples. But if we ignore the workings of the system or the machine that produced the bad actors, we might wind up replacing that actor with another who behaves the same way. But in the United States, this is usually exactly what we do. Tatum and Takaki explain this in this week's reading. In this class, I want to avoid the temptation to just look at the person who did something bad. Weinstein, Epstein, or the officers who killed George Floyd, for example. Instead, I want to look at the machine, the system, the mechanisms that produced these people, the norms that virtually guaranteed they would wind up where they wound up, in positions of power. Our job is to look into the box and examine the end product, what the machine turned out. But we shouldn't waste our time throwing out the end products that don't fit. We should just redesign the machine so that the end results are more conducive to what we actually want. If we want a machine that turns out mostly white CEOs, presidents, and leaders, we don't need to change much at all. The system seems designed to accommodate. But if we want something different than our ancestors, something different than their barbaric, sexist, backward ways, then we must redesign the system, or else we will continue to find end products, people in positions of power, that are unacceptable. The machine of television production is a really good example to look at. There are more options every day for what we watch and how to watch it. Producers compete for our attention. They try to figure out what we want to watch and then produce shows that will make us tune out of their competitor's station and into theirs. That's how the system works. So any finger pointing at the media is, to some degree, finger pointing at ourselves. Let's look at an example of this. This is a quick shot of all of the things that most of us know about crime and criminal justice. Most of us don't spend much time personally interacting with the criminal underworld, and unless you work in a correctional institution or live in one as an inmate, you might learn most of what you know about prison from your television or from movies. Now, you aren't so gullible as to believe everything you see. Of course, these films are fictionalized stories, even when they claim to be based on a true story. But we don't learn the main narratives as fact so much as the background noise. How inmates behave, how they treat one another in the guards, how they dress, how they handle disagreements, things like that. And what we learn, often without realizing we've even learned it, is that prisons are scary places full of bad people who will victimize us the second we let them loose. When you think about it this way, it isn't really our fault that we have such a jacked up prison system. We're surrounded by messages we can't avoid, telling us that this is the only way. But once we start to talk about it, things change. And this is the reason why communication is such an important field of study. If we don't recognize the way that messages affect us, we're doomed to wander around misled by ourselves, suckered by our own demand for spectacle and excitement, the reasons producers give us these narratives. Don't forget, we asked for them. Let's look at one more example of how we learn things from TV and film. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the problematic media from US culture throughout the last 30 years, but you probably notice a text or two that you've watched before. And if you watched closely, either in the background or front and center, they will all contain skewed representations that teach viewers problematic principles and beliefs. We'll talk about many of these specifically throughout the class, and I'll open a site for you to post your own examples on Canvas, so keep your eyes open for that. But that's a big part of what this class is about, examining cultural artifacts from our past and trying to figure out how they informed our current beliefs. So here's a terrifying question. What if the machine isn't broken at all? What if Matt Lauer and Harvey Weinstein and Bill Clinton and Jeff Epstein are not exceptions to the rule? What if they're one of the products produced by a machine that has been humming away unscrutinized for thousands of years? What if George Floyd and Philando Castile and Rodney King and Trayvon Martin and Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice and Eric Garner and Michael Brown and Walter Scott and Rayshard Brooks and Emmett Till and all of the other black folks or poor folks or mentally ill folks or addicted folks killed by the police were not a misfiring of the machine so much as an unfortunate side effect of the way it's designed? What if we could have designed the system to avoid these things if only they were important enough? Then we'd have a class. I'm not going to dive too deep into the readings since they're so short this week and you have a quiz over them, so make sure you finish them. But I will remind everybody that Tatum's description of prejudice versus racism was a valuable tool to have at your disposal. We can call people names all we want, but only those connected to power bite the hardest. We can think ill of people all we want, based on race or gender identity or religion or anything else. But it doesn't mean anything if we are in the minority, if our stereotypes and prejudices only reinforce our own beliefs. To really have your prejudicial thoughts pull weight in the real world, you need to connect them to a system of power, like racism or classism or gender. That's why your intent has nothing to do with whether or not you were being racist. In fact, referring to people as racists is sort of missing the point. Sure, some people do hold deliberate, offensive opinions, and they often share them proudly. We might call these folks racists. But their words wouldn't mean much if there weren't a system behind them, a powerful mechanism whereby certain bodies have had an easier go of it than others since this country declared itself a country. Same with sexism or gender or homophobia or transphobia. The reason that heterophobia isn't a thing, even though I'm sure plenty of people of queer identity say all sorts of awful things about straights, is because there's no long-standing system whereby their words have cultural currency. They aren't reminding anyone that there is a long-standing system whereby straight people have, and continue to be, systematically oppressed by LGBTQIA communities, because there's no such system in existence, and there never has been. Same with race. It only works one way because it's only ever worked one way in the United States. There's never been an era when the figures in these slides were flipped, where black folks held the majority of the wealth and political power in our country. Power and prejudice work together. Here's a thought experiment for you to take home, one that usually blows students' minds by the end of week 5 or 6, once we've had some time to dig into this class material. Did you attend a segregated school? You probably answered with a quick no, but stop and think about that again. If you're thinking of a few students that check a box, either of a specific race or a specific religion or a specific class, then that would mean you classified desegregation as making sure just a few students of color can go to mostly white schools, or that just a few Muslim students can be sent to a Christian school. But that's not desegregation. That's not how most of us think of desegregation. We usually think of deliberately integrating cultures, classes, races, religions, of forcing them into the melting pot. The system that turned out segregation laws and Jim Crow mandates is the same system that created and maintained race-based slavery. The updates that we like to believe took place in the 1960s, in which schools and public spaces were desegregated, never happened. We're still a largely segregated society. And for those who wish it to be that way, it's possible for it to be that way most of the time. They can find plenty of schools for their children to attend in almost any state. They can find churches and grocers and neighborhoods and community organizations. If they're white, they can go nearly anywhere in the country. For people of color, this is not the case. So as we press through this week, I want you to think about power and how it operates, and how it makes some accusations or claims or allegations stickier than others. And begin to think about how we can disrupt these systems.